Welcome to this episode of In the Weeds. Today we're at the Pine Tree Research Station and we're going to be taking a close look at palmer amaranth or pigweed control on rice levees. I'm actually standing in a production field of rice here. You can see we've got some extremely large palmer amaranth or pigweed on these levees, and we've got some demos that I'm going to share with you today. We're going to take a look at really what's the most effective option for controlling this weed, as well as what impact does size have on control of palmer amaranth with some of our better herbicide options that we have available. Come along and let's take a look at some of the plots. These levees were formed 5 weeks ago. This levee would have been midsummer, so you're getting a little bit more growth than what we would typically see out of palmer amaranth on a rice levee that was basically formed in maybe April or May. A lot more growth, but what we have is our untreated check here to my right, and now we're going to walk through and we're going to take a look at several different sizes, a couple of sizes of pigweed, and some programs that worked or some herbicides that worked, as well as some that didn't work. As we move here to my left, we're going to see our first levee plot that was sprayed. We sprayed the entire levee here. This would have been on what I call small pigweed. The pigweed would have been about 2 to 3 inches in size, so really a timely application. This is propanil or stem. And what we notice in this strip is that we had a very effective herbicide for controlling palmer amaranth, a very high level of control. 99 to 100% control with that timely application. Propanil in general is a very effective broadleaf herbicide if it's on small weeds. It's also a very effective sedge material. If we actually look through this plot here, we do see some nut sedge on this levee, but there's a lot less nut sedge on this levee than what we're going to see in some of these levees where we had some size to the nut sedge, or some of the products that really just don't have a lot of activity on nut sedge. So that's a benefit that you get in addition to the pigweed control that we're seeing with this application. I'll also tell you that we came back and we used a residual herbicide on this levee to try to prevent another flush of pigweed. This application here was made 3 weeks ago. If we had not had a residual herbicide on this levee, we would have had an additional flush, most likely by this point. But overall, very effective propanil is when applied in a timely manner. This is sharpened. This is sharpened at 1 ounce. The propanil rate also, just again as a reminder back there, that was 4 quarts of propanil. This is 1 ounce of sharpen with crop oil concentrate, and you can just see sharpen is really not as effective as what we saw with propanil. And we definitely, if we are going to use sharpen, trying to use it for pigweed control, crop oil concentrate is what we would have to use. That's what the label allows. If you tried using something like methylated seed oil, it's going to be very lethal to any rice that you had on the levee or any rice that you were to hit that's not on the levee. So that's kind of what we see with a sharpen. Not as effective as what we saw with propanil. Another herbicide that's getting a lot of play in terms of rice levees is loyant. We're looking at 8 ounces of loyant here. 8 ounces of loyant was not as effective as what we saw with propanil. If you are going to use 8 ounces, generally you're going to have to need multiple applications of loyant. I really like 8 ounces of loyant. That's about a $15 per acre treatment, but with that you're going to need multiple applications. And what we're going to notice here earlier, it really doesn't matter whether we're talking small pigweed or even larger pigweed. Generally speaking, if you're going to use an auxin herbicide like this, you're going to need multiple applications to try to get a high level of control. But overall, I tell you that this may be slightly more effective than what we saw with the sharpen, but still, to this point, the propanil, if we're on small pigweed, the propanil appears to be the best option. Want to move now to 16 ounces. This would be a full rate of loyant, and still see some pigweeds here. We didn't necessarily kill them, but we do have, again, a high level of activity. If you had rice on this levee, this rice for the most part would grow and do probably a pretty good job of choking out this pigweed. It really has killed a lot of it. What it hasn't killed, again, it's been out here for 21 days now. We haven't gotten much regrowth of the pigweed that was sprayed. But when I take a look at 8 ounces versus 16 ounces, don't see a lot of differences in those. So if an individual is going to use loyant for pigweed control, I think 8 ounces, especially in a sequential program, is going to look as effective or just as effective as what we see with 16 ounces. Want to move now to 2,4-D. What you notice with 2,4-D, this is an option in some areas of the state. Of course, we've got some restrictions in other areas of the state. And you start really, when you look at this plot or this levee, you see a lot of sedge on this levee. And really the difference here is if you take a look at propionyl, sharpen, as well as the Loyant products, those products have some activity on sedge. And we've got another In the Weeds video where we talk specifically about sedge control with the various herbicides we have available today. But you know, 2,4-D really isn't a herbicide that's going to provide much, if any, sedge control. Now, it did a pretty good job of controlling our Palmer Amaranth. Again, this is not what I would consider a one-pass system. We're going to have to come back and probably make another application during the growing season to keep this levee clean. But overall, this would be somewhat comparable to what we see with Loyant on a small pigweed. Again, 2 to 3 inch, really a timely application of the herbicide. As we move across now, we're going to move into some larger pigweed. This is just, again, another untreated check, similar to the first untreated check that we saw. But now we're going to be moving into pigweed that is 8 to 12 inches in size. One thing that I noted earlier was that propionyl is a very effective herbicide on small weeds. I don't care whether it's grasses, whether it's broadleaves, whether it's sedges, we get some size of those weeds and this herbicide really begins to fail. And while it was one of the most effective herbicides on the small weeds, it's going to be one of the least effective herbicides as we get to these larger pigweed sizes. So here we've got 8 to 12 inch Palmer Amaranth, 4 quarts of propionyl on this. We burn off some leaves. This has been out now for 14 days. This was applied 7 days after what we saw with on the smaller weeds. Beginning to get a lot of regrowth. We didn't kill many, if any, pigweed at this rate on that weed size. We move over now to sharpen. 1 ounce of sharpen was one of the weaker treatments that we had on the small pigweed. It's one of the weaker treatments that we've got here on the large pigweed. This is actually a PPO susceptible pigweed, but again, with crop oil, 1 ounce of sharpen just really doesn't do what we're hoping it would do in terms of controlling pigweeds on levees. I think we've got much better options out here than what we see here with sharpen. Want to move now to Loyant. This is 8 ounces of Loyant. This has been out, as I said, for 14 days. We're going to look at 8 ounces. We're going to look at 16 ounces. Don't see a large difference. There's probably some subtle differences here. 16 ounces is going to be a little bit better than what we're going to see with 8, but overall, they're going to look very, very similar. And when you're on a pigweed of this size, again, one application is not going to be sufficient. I would look at coming back on these probably another 7 days with another application of Loyant. What we've seen is 2 applications, about 14 to 21 days apart, 8 ounces can be very effective in terms of controlling Palmer on these levees. So again, it's all about using sequential applications. One app here is not going to work, but you do see here, this one app does look a lot better than what you saw with the propionyl and the sharpen. Moving over now to the 16 ounces. Again, just don't see a lot of difference between this 16. Guys, this is a very large pigweed. 8 to 12 inches is an extremely, I mean, that's definitely a salvage situation that we're in on these levees. This levee here would also be somewhat similar to what we see in row rice. Again, if you let this stuff get large, you're not going to take it down with one application. In most instances, you're going to need 2 applications, and you will get a benefit. If we had rice on the levee, the competitive nature of the rice definitely would have helped us out in this situation. But again, these are bare levees that we're looking at here. The last plot that I'm going to show you, really prior to Loyant, I would say was our go-to standard. Within the state. We've done a lot of research on this over the last 15, 16 years, and what we've noticed is, again, Weedar 2,4-D by far has been our best option on rice levees. But what we have also seen here recently is, if I'm in a salvage situation, I've got large pigweed on those levees, Loyant is just as effective as 2,4-D. And again, there's areas of the state in which we can't use 2,4-D, and really there's been tremendous value on the use of Loyant in those geographies. So with that, again, I'm going to conclude this episode of In the Weeds. I appreciate you being with us today. And as we close, I'd just like to say thank you. I'd like to say thanks to the Arkansas Rice Research and Promotion Board for their support of our research as well as demonstrations like what you're seeing here today. And this video, again, is made possible because of the funds that we received from that board. So with that, thanks again. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of In the Weeds.